And wait. And we're recording. Okay, Dad, how you doing?
Great, Ty.
You're doing great.
Excited.
Excited.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Tell me about the very first time you saw football.
I played the first football experience I ever had was watching football on television when I was very, very young and watching my family supported the Arkansas Razorbacks back in the 50s and 60s. So as a little boy, about 6 or 7 years old, we'd watch the Arkansas's big games every year we were with Texas. And so we'd watch the game and root for Arkansas. Unfortunately, Texas usually won.
And
So,
so when did you always think you were going to play football? Because your brother played
oh,
football or what?
my family were big into sports. Baseball and football were the two favorites of my father. And so he kind of ingrained in us that we wanted to be football players from when I was a little boy.
So what was your first day of football?
My first day of football was I was a Holly Hills Eagle when I was about 7 years old.
Nice. And what was your thoughts going into that first day?
Well, I was excited about being a little kid football player. It was a whole new world, getting all dressed up in the uniform and putting on shoulder pads and helmets and stuff like that. Because we started playing tackle football when I was about in the second grade.
Okay. And what do you remember of that?
I remembered that the field, and it was a horrible field. It had stickers and it had mostly dirt. It didn't have a lot of grass on it, and so that was where we practiced, was behind my school. And all my friends from elementary school were on the team, and we just had fun because we could do it together as a group, and it was just a great activity.
So who was your first coach?
My first coach, I had various coaches along the way, but the interesting thing was that there weren't any dads who coached back then. They actually had people from the community who would like coach, not necessarily parents, but other men in the community that like sports.
Yes, who was
So
your first coach?
I think his name was Larry Wood.
Okay, so 2020 football practices done a certain way. What did you do? Take me through a 1967-year-old football practice.
We did calisthenics. So we did old fashioned calisthenics like jumping jacks and push ups and sit ups and old, those types of exercises. And there was a jungle gym up by the school, and we'd have to, anytime you got in trouble, you had to run around the jungle gym. And so that was, horrible punishment to run around the jungle gym because it was up a hill from where the practice was. So we'd get in trouble and have to run up that hill. And that's a memory I have to this day that I hated when Larry Wood said, "Take a lap."
Was
That
it
meant you
how many was it? 8 on 8, 7 on 7, 11 on 11,
11 on 11.
11 on 11. And what kind
Yes.
of were you running? What kind of offense? Was it because what everyone watched back then?
Oh, see,
Fear?
football so long ago was very, very basic. It was called, you ran a T formation, quarterback, fullback, and two halfbacks. So they lined
On
up
either side of the fullback court,
either side
halfback,
of the
halfback.
fullback,
Yeah.
and then the offensive line was two ends that weren't called tight ends, but they're today's tight ends, two tackles, two guards, and a center. And like I said, all my buddies played all those positions, and some of my best friends were the center, and center is a guy that I was best friends with. He was our center, and
So what did you play the first year?
I played a variety of things, but I played end and I played running back and things like that when I was little.
Didn't want to play quarterback.
Not at that time.
Not at that time.
We had
Uh,
some other little guy who was quarterback. One of my other friends was a quarterback, and he wasn't particularly good. And in those days, the quarterback had one job, was to hand off to the running back and the fullback. And so the quarterbacks didn't run much. We didn't even dream of throwing a pass. And so it was
or you kind of wanted
basically,
to be the running back,
yeah,
running back
yeah,
or the end.
yeah. And the end wasn't, you didn't do much at end except block on sweeps.
Yeah.
And so we ran sweeps up the middle and around the end, and that was about that was about as, we got real fancy. You might run a reverse or something and start one way and go the other. So we did a lot of very, very, very basic plays. Turn and hand it to the fullback, or lead with one of the running backs and give it to the other one and stuff like that. So
So
it was,
Oklahoma's a lot of practice.
no, didn't do much Oklahoma's.
So what'd you do besides calisthenics?
Did a lot of where we did scrimmage a lot. We did a whole lot of scrimmaging. So we had enough kids on the team. We had a full offense and defense. And so we lined up offense against defense. And I was always on the offensive team. And, we'd stand out there, and the field was so bad and didn't have any lights and didn't have anything other than stickers. So if you fell down, you usually got a sticker in you. And so, and you'd get stickers in the various little things that go in your ankle. And so when you got done after practice, you'd have all these little, I don't know, kind of like stickers in your socks.
What kind of
So,
helmet did you wear?
well, helmets were dramatically different. It was a piece of plastic with some netting that was made of rope, so that your head set on that netting that was made out of rope, and the plastic was thin, and then it had a face mask, but a 2-bar face mask, basically.
Just two
And
like
so,
this? No,
yes,
maybe one bar here.
and yeah, one or two up and down ones. And so we had, your helmet did nothing for you basically, because it was so inferior quality. The helmets of today are so much better than the ones we started with.
You think you had a
Not,
concussion?
I don't know that you didn't. I did in high school, but I don't remember being concussed when I was a little kid. We didn't hit very hard. We didn't hit hard by today's standards.
Did you?
So the scrimmages, there was like 7 or 8 kids on the the offense and defense were real close together, and they had an equal number of defensive linemen than you had offensive linemen. So as a result, it was there. You had a short distance to build up speed to hit somebody, and the defense was as simple as the offense was simple. So the defense was just 6 guys in defensive line positions, and then 3 linebackers and 2 safeties, essentially is all you had. So it wasn't, offense and defense were, it was a big pile of people just running into each other slowly.
Right.
And so we rarely had, if you made 2 or 3 yards, it was a good play.
How good was
So,
your team?
well,
Years?
the first couple of years, we were average, or, we weren't any better than anybody else. We'd played other teams and you're familiar with some of the teams that we played. We played the Bruins and the Bombers and the this and that. So they were all neighborhood teams.
Yeah.
So the Eagles were from our area. There were the Spartans.
To the Cherry Creek High School?
Yeah. Eagles were Cherry Creek High School kids, and the Bombers and the I can't think of the other names right now. I thought Spartans. We had a team called the Spartans, and the Bombers. Well, actually, it was called the Blue Bombers. So the Blue Bombers, we didn't like those guys. Those guys were good, and so they were from Denver, and the Spartans were over by Thomas Jefferson High School. So
Holly Hills Elementary was it segregated school at the time? you have any black
Segregated.
kids on your team?
No, zero.
So the
It
school,
wasn't segregated. There just wasn't any black kids that lived in the neighborhood.
was there a specific school that they did go to in Denver?
No, they went to a variety of schools in Denver.
Oh, okay. So what year did
Most,
you feel like football started to become kind of the next level up of doing more things?
well, there were some innovations and some of the people introduced new things. We use, when we were like 10 or 11, the coach came in and he said, we're going to run single wing. And so single wing meant that you directly snapped it to the quarterback in the air. And the quarterback was about 3 steps behind the center or something like that. And the backs were all backed by the quarterback. And what that did was, you snap it to the quarterback, and if the quarterback was a good athlete, he would lead with all those running backs in front of him and run sweeps and stuff. So single wing was a dramatic change from the T formation. So single wing, we thought we were really doing something special when we started doing single wing.
And what positions did you play kind of each year from there? Mainly the same or what?
Mainly the same. I was running back when I was 10 or 11. I was a running back, and that was a good time. I was doing well in baseball. I'd been better at baseball as a little kid. I was very precocious as a baseball player because my father would just spend hours and hours pitching to me, and so I got to where I could hit baseballs real well as a little guy, and so. My football wasn't, my dad liked baseball better than football. So we really almost devoted more time to baseball than we did football. But then when I got to be a running back and about 10 or 11 years old, then football really became fun. I enjoyed that year a lot because I got to run with the ball often.
And so like sixth, seventh, eighth grade, as you're kind of entering junior high school, what was the team success like?
Well, uh, that was a huge moment in my life for a couple of reasons. One, between 11 years old and 13, I went through a heavy phase. So I started, and I'd always eaten every donut in the world, and so my diet was terrible and stuff like that. So when I turned 12 years old, I was about as big around as I was tall, and so I was switched to tackle. And then when I was 12, we had from 11 to 12, our coach quit. And we thought, oh, what are we going to do for a coach next year and stuff like that. And then this older man came out with a clipboard in his hand. And he said, my name is Irv Single. I'm going to be your coach. And we all thought, how good is this? What does this older guy know about football? Well, it turns out he'd played center for the San Diego Chargers or Los Angeles Chargers / San Diego Chargers. And he had been a great player in professional football. And so we had Coach Single. And all of a sudden, and then a bunch of guys between 11 and 12 had quit. They didn't like football and they didn't like the hitting and stuff like that. And when Coach Single took over, he made it fun. And he brought oranges and Cokes or whatever to the practice field for us all. And then he recruited my brother and some of the other good high school players, guys that had been good high school players, to help him coach. So we had like 3 or 4 coaches. So the fact that when I was 12, we had 3 or 4 coaches, we had this great team, and we had, can you imagine a 12-year-old team with all these coaches and one of them being an ex-NFL guy? I think he played for the University of Cincinnati before he went to the NFL. And he was fun. And he would he was positive. He was the first coach we ever had that would come up and say, because before that, they just yelled at you and told you to run a lap. But Coach Single said, he'd come up and he said, did you knock the starch out of that guy or what? And so then you felt good. And then a bunch of guys that had quit saw how much fun we were having, and they came back and got on the team. And then we had, then we went to the championship against I think it was the Bombers. Anyway, we played a school at another area that had a good team. So it was us and them, and it was a, battle. And we were so excited, thinking that we were going to win. I think it was the Blue Bombers. And anyway, we lost 6-0. And so that was devastating to lose the championship when I was 12. But we'd won every other game except that one.
Yeah.
So that made a huge difference in our lives. Coach Single, because he was so good, and then the fact that we were playing for the championship, all of a sudden football supplanted baseball as my favorite.
That year?
Yeah, that was the year. That was the year football became my favorite, even playing right tackle.
So the next year, you got smaller again, and then moved to a different position?
Right. Yeah, but the final thing about what made 12-year-old football so great was Coach Single had been an offensive lineman. And so he knew offensive linemen didn't get much glory and they didn't have a whole lot of fun. So he told me that as the right tackle, I was going to make a call. When we went up the line of scrimmage, I would call out a call just like the quarterback or whatever. And if I said George, that meant I was going to cross block. I was going to block to my left, and then the guard was going to come behind me and block to my right. Well, when you're 12 years old and kids don't expect you to come at them from an angle like that, I would obliterate some people in that. So just the fact that he realized how much fun it was going to be, how much more fun the game was going to be if I can make a call about who I was going to block, and I was kind of that was another thing. He identified nobody wants to be the right tackle, but if you give the right tackle some other stuff to do, it made it a lot more fun.
Becomes more enjoyable. So
Yeah.
next year, 13. What position?
Well, I trimmed back down again, and I went back to end. I was the right end.
Yeah.
And started throwing some passes when I got to that age, but not many.
And then that was the last year before high school?
Well, actually there was a gap year. There was a year where there was no little kid football anymore, and there was no school football. So that's all you had options for. We had that, we called it Young America League back then. AYL or YAL, whatever, were the same thing. So I went from Eagles, but then there was a year where Eagles didn't play anymore. I was too old to be an Eagle, and I was too young to play in 8th grade. So anyway, 7th grade, there was no football, which was, just kind of disappointing.
Sit around.
It was a year I lost a bunch of the weight. Oh, and then those weigh-ins, as you know, one of the toughest thing about little kids football was every year you had to be weighed in before, and the weights were way less than they became later. And there was no such thing as a double patch. If you were more than a single patch, a certain weight, you couldn't play. And so that year I gained weight and became a tackle, I had to lose 14 pounds to make weight in a short period of time because I wanted to play so bad. But if I hadn't lost that 14 pounds, I couldn't have played in my 6th grade year either.
Wow. So then 8th grade was school football.
8th grade was school football, and I played right end.
And that was playing for Cherry Creek High School or Cherry Creek Middle School?
Cherry Creek East Junior High School.
Yeah.
And our big rival.
From what was it like switching from youth league football to high school football?
Well, the challenge I spent the rest of my life finding was I never would have a coach better than Irv Single. And so at school, they just said, whichever PE teacher wanted to be the coach, you're a coach. And they only had one coach, and it wasn't run nearly as well as my little kid football. So it was actually a disappointment to play 8th grade football. But we joined with some other elementary schools. There were more kids. And I played right end. And our big rival game was the last one of the year. We played Cherry Creek West. So it was West versus East, and they were ahead. And we went driving down the field at the end of the game, and they threw me a pass, which I ran down to about the 2-yard line almost in front of the goalpost, and I fumbled. So then I had that to live down for the rest of my life. But so it was almost like there was a commercial on TV at the time. My big brother Skip came walking down on the field, and we walked off the field. He had his arm around me because I was so despondent about fumbling at the 2, and we would have won if I hadn't fumbled. So that was another defining moment of
What number did you wear?
87.
87. Was there a reason? You just tight end number?
Tight end number. Yeah. I don't remember the reason. There may have been. I think there was some Baltimore Colt guy that was number 87. I don't remember though who it was.
So going into high school football, was that a big difference then?
Well, I still hadn't grown much. So in 9th grade, I still was shorter. I hadn't hit my growth spurt yet. And so I didn't play as, I wasn't as important to the team because I was still a little bit shorter. Some of the other guys had already grown, like shaving and everything came late. And so there was guys with full beards that were in the 9th grade, and I had never shaved in my life type of thing. So there were some people that developed faster than me. So I was kind of behind as a 9th grader, and I still played and stuff like that, but I wasn't, I may have been a guard that year.
Was
So
it a junior varsity and a varsity?
Oh, there was every year had a team. There was a varsity, a junior varsity, a sophomore team, and a freshman team.
And so you played on the freshman team?
Yeah, and I got to where I didn't, I wasn't, it was kind of a sad time because some of the other kids, whatever sport, they kind of caught up to me in some of the athleticism. So I went through another year. It was kind of sort of a sad year that I was watching all these other people get taller and faster and stuff like that, and I hadn't hit that growth spurt yet. So I was kind of it wasn't like the year where I was 122 pounds as a 6th grader or whatever, but it was not as fun at that year.
So what about 10th grade? You come into 10th grade.
Well, that was a big summer in my lifetime. So I kind of like that other spurt that I made as a little kid. I grew a bunch, and I got tall and thin again. And all of a sudden I could play a little bit more, on that as I grew and taller. And I went back to playing end, and on defense I played outside linebacker. And then in those days I played on the junior varsity in the 10th grade or whatever. And so I was playing, and I had kind of caught up to those people that had passed me the year before. So I, got to play all the time. And it became sort of, I was good enough to where I was always on the field, but it was at the junior varsity level. And then I did get to suit up for the final senior game of the year. And so on the side, it was so exciting. Those sophomores were selected to suit up for the seniors' last game, or the varsity team. And so we were all on the sideline, and I was so excited. And all the varsity guys got to wear one color jersey, and all the sophomore guys got to move up. Ours was just a little bit different color. And that was kind of embarrassing to be in that pink jersey. I felt like it looked pink.
Not quite properly read.
It wasn't quite properly read. So it was a good news that we got to suit up. It was bad news that my jersey color wasn't the same as everybody else's.
So then 11th grade, you were on varsity.
Yep. 11th grade evolved into, by the 11th grade, both in baseball and in football, I was one of the best players on the team. I played offense and defense, and I played same thing. I played end and outside linebacker, and so I played almost every play, every snap. I was on the kickoff team, the kickoff receiving team, the punt receiving team. I was on there were games where I basically didn't come off the field.
So how would you say football had changed from 1960 to 1970?
Not much. There wasn't a big change yet. It was coming, but it hadn't happened yet. So in that year, the University of Texas and the University of Arkansas played number 1 versus number 2 on December 6th in Fayetteville. And the president flew down to Fayetteville to watch the game. And they took him by helicopter from Fayetteville Airport and he landed right on the south side of the field there. Everybody in my family, every football fan, it was called the game of the century at the time, number 1 versus number 2. And Arkansas was ahead with like 4 minutes to go. They were ahead. And then all of a sudden, Texas started coming back. Texas was using what's called the wishbone offense. And they were awesome at it. They were a powerhouse. But Arkansas was beating them. And then they on 4th and 3, they threw a pass, which was unheard of. Texas never throws a pass. And from James Street to Randy Peschel, I think's the guy's name. And they got a first down and they went on and scored and they won by 1 point. And it was the most devastating thing I'd ever witnessed on television. My family was all sitting around the television and I remember my mother crying. So that was that year football. So everybody loved the wishbone offense. So my coach, high school coach, Fred Tassone, who was a kind of a legend, adopted the wishbone offense. So again, the playing right in didn't mean you did anything but block because quarterback turned and gave it to the fullback or ran the triple option, they call
Right
it.
around the end and pitched it.
Yeah.
Pitched it or
Give it
kept
to the fullback, quarterback run it, or pitch to the tail of the running back.
What was your team success that year, 11th grade?
One of the Denver newspapers, well, the big Denver newspaper at the time, says the greatest high school team ever assembled in Denver. So we were undefeated but lost in the playoffs. We were upset in the playoffs. And we played in CSU's stadium, Colorado State University Stadium in Fort Collins, against the Fort Collins team. We were the number 1 seed and they were the number 8 seed or whatever.
Yeah.
And we had to play at their field.
Yeah.
And our good running back got hurt and stuff like that. So we were a little undermanned and we lost. But they were a good team also. They went on to win it. But the team they beat in the finals was somebody we'd played earlier in the year in the regular season that we'd beaten 28-0.
Yeah.
So it was one of those other devastating losses. I mean, devastating.
So going into your senior year, you guys probably thought you were good enough to go win it then?
Well, no, we had a lot of seniors from my junior year that graduated that we knew we were going to miss. We graduated a lot. So from junior to senior year, we thought we were going to come back good, but not as good because we lost this. We had a really good quarterback and a defensive end that was really good. And so those guys had graduated. So we knew it was going to be hard. They were going to be hard to replace. But a couple of kids moved in from out of state, and we had a couple of good new guys. But my senior year was one of the worst seasons Cherry Creek ever had. Against Arapahoe, there was a picture of 7 starters on the sidelines injured, one of them being me.
Yeah. So how many games did you play your senior year?
4.
And what was your record at the time when you got hurt?
2-0. 1. I may have played either 1 or 2 before I got hurt. So we were, I think, 1-1.
Yeah, and then you got hurt in the 3rd game.
Yeah.
And then
I came back at the end of the year.
Moved to the kind of the next batch of kids.
Yeah.
Kind of ushered in a younger generation.
Yeah, the coach's son became the quarterback as a sophomore, and he had some sophomore growing pains.
Yeah. and kind of got ready for the next kind of group. So what was your
Yeah.
thought after you had ACL surgery at 18 with continuing sports careers and et cetera,
Oh,
especially back then?
I
Wasn't
at
exactly
the
like
time,
Adrian Peterson had done anything.
well, the knee injury in my case wasn't as significant as other injuries would be later, but so I actually got to come back and play the last 3 games of my senior year, and they moved me from end to fullback, so I didn't have to run quite as much.
Mhm.
And so then I became the lead blocker, and we won all those games. And I got to be the captain on a couple of those. That was a kind of a nice deal. I was captain the first game of that my senior year and the last game. So they always picked people that they thought had done well to be the captains. And so to be picked captain in the first game and the last game were kind of a special moments for me.
And then post that season, what was your thoughts on going forward with in relation to football,
My dream,
baseball, or where were you at
my
with all
dream
that?
since I was like 7 was to play for the Arkansas Razorbacks. So we took that, my first game of my senior year where I intercepted 2 passes and all that kind of stuff, took that film, an old 16 millimeter film, and sent it to Fayetteville. So that,
A little bit different than rivals.com.
yeah, yeah,
Didn't have a Hudl account yet.
it was about as big around as,
You probably didn't have
pizza.
multiple copies of those or things of that you could put on YouTube or.
Hadn't quite got there yet. So we sent that 16 millimeter film to Fayetteville to Coach Frank Broyles because I'd always dreamed of playing. And I had a particular position that Arkansas called monster back. And so I dreamed of being the monster back for Arkansas. And the guy that had played it in that national championship game was named Bobby Fields. And I wanted the position to go from Bobby Fields to me.
Yeah.
So didn't quite work out, but it was my dream when I was little. I even put an Arkansas decal on my Cherry Creek helmet, which was against the rules, but I had an Arkansas decal on the back of my helmet.
So did you feel more comfortable as a outside linebacker, monster back, tight end, fullback? What do you think your best
I think outside
version of you?
what we called monster back.
Yeah.
I think I was good because then you had the beauty of monster back was you could, if you got to say, well, I think you always could go where you thought the play was going to go. So if you thought it was going wide side, you could go stand on the wide side. If you thought it was a passing situation, you could drop off and play pass more. So it was some freedom, which was really cool at the time. It was a pretty good innovation we got it from the colleges, and I like
What kind
that.
of base defense were people playing then?
Oh, simple. We played base defense was a 5-2 or a 4-3, and so you had either 4 down linemen or 5.
Yeah.
That was about as elaborate as the defense was got in those days. But the only innovation defensively was that that one guy that you designated as kind of the freedom to play run if the other team ran a lot, play pass if the other team passed a lot, and I got to be that. That was fun.
Did you ever split out as the end? Were you ever a split end?
Not normally. We normally were even through high school, it's 2 tight ends because we did wishbone that first year, and then
Other teams do that though, where they'd put split ends.
Yes, occasionally. Yeah. Occasionally you'd have a flanker. They called it a flanker back in the day. They'd have a flanker back go out there.
And a 3-point stance, or would he stand up normal?
3-point stance.
When did they start standing up normal?
We never did.
After.
Yeah.
Where was the favorite place you ever played?
Well, I intercepted a lot. I like defense. I like that where they gave me the freedom to either, I could come off the
location.
Oh, favorite field or whatever?
Yeah, field. Where was the
Oh,
best place?
Sutler Bowl, without a doubt.
It was the nicest stadium back then, big
Oh yeah,
still and better.
it was better than anybody else's field by a ton.
Yeah. Where was the worst venue?
Oh,
Nothing sticks in your mind?
not anything that was a whole lot worse, because all the high school fields at the time were pretty good.
Yeah.
We played at Littleton District 6. We played Arapahoe and Littleton over there, and it wasn't bad. It wasn't a bad field. I didn't like the fact that they didn't have stands. A couple of places didn't have stands on one side. I
Yeah.
never liked those fields that just had stands on the one side. And then, because if you're on, if you're a visitor, then you're standing over there on the
Nothing
middle of night.
behind you.
Yeah.
What's the so we got in a brawl my junior year. Do you have a crazy story of on the bus, on the field, fighting with a team, somebody doing something crazy?
The easily the craziest game was in my junior year. It snowed, a huge snowstorm in October or November, or whatever it was. We were playing with those Aurora schools, where the Aurora field is, Aurora Hinckley,
Hmm.
and we were playing at that field. So the sands were all on the west side, and so there was 6 inches of snow on the field, and they didn't have any fancy machines to plow it or anything like that. So, they gone out there and shoveled it a little bit for the lines just to see where it was, but there was a legitimate 6-inch snow on the ground. And so when you get down in your stance, the snow would go up to about half, up to your wrist. So, and because of the horrible conditions, nobody could do anything. You couldn't run, and it turned the game into, and it was muddy, because back in those days when you'd heat it up a little bit, instead of getting, wet, it got wet and muddy. And so your uniform would get just trashed. And the Hinckley people hated us and we hated them, but then they have the fans right next to each other. So then a huge snowball fight between us on the field and the people in the stands, it developed. And, there used to be lots of fights after the games, because there were, Aurora in particular, Aurora Central, Aurora Hinckley, or lots of them, they hated us. Everybody hated Cherry Creek. So Inglewood, there would always be fight. Now, there would be fights after the games, but, didn't involve my group, but there were a lot of fan incidents, guys getting beat up and things like that at all the high school games in the day. So, yeah, that's a vivid memory of,
I think it was way different before cell phones and
yeah,
the
it was,
coverage of high school
oh,
sports and everything.
unbelievably different, unbelievably different. And if you wanted to see anything about the game, you had to get the next day's newspaper and read the newspaper and see if see if your team or you got talked about in the newspaper. That was the biggest, most exciting thing, was check the newspaper. Like if you'd had a good night the night before, one game I intercepted 2 passes and stuff like that, or ran one back for a touchdown, and I couldn't wait to get the newspaper, and my mother would clip it out. And so we'd have these she kept all that stuff for years. That was scrapbooks with if you made the paper.
Did it feel like the school and the town were a little bit more prideful in the high school football team back then?
Oh, ridiculous. The place would be packed. And so and the rivalries and the hating Arapahoe and all the things like that. The gyms would be packed for the basketball games and the football games and stuff. It was a great time. It was a great time to go through high school sports.
So after 60 years involved with football, what do you
Yep.
think makes teams, the number one thing that makes teams successful versus unsuccessful?
Well, if you have easily, I think if you got good players, you got good teams. If you got bad players, you got bad teams. And no coach has ever made a tackle,
Not the X's and the O's.
but coaching can make a huge difference about putting people in their correct places and enabling the people that need to be doing the stuff, evaluating talent, putting talent where it needs to be. But without a doubt, if you have no talent, you're not going to go very far.
If you had to
So,
pick a 10-year time frame, 60 to 70, 70 to 80, etc., up till 2010 till 2020, what's your favorite era to watch football and the style of it?
well, just because of good memories and stuff like that. The 60s were great to watch. Arkansas was the national champion one year. So the 60s were fun because of that shootout. They called it the shootout, the greatest game of the century in 69. And the 70s were great because of people I knew that were involved and connections. So, but 60s and 70s were my favorite.
And what do you think of the game in 2020?
Oh,
How
it's
different it
dramatic.
looks?
The game is so much further along these days than the old days. Doesn't make the old days bad because the people that were doing it at the time were the best that we had. But between the size of the athletes, the speed of the athletes, the innovations that come along, the pass, the high school team back in the day, if a guy for the season caught 20 or 30 passes, that was a lot of receptions. And so it changed so dramatically. It's almost a different game, but I still love it, both then and now. But I can't. It's hard to relate as being a 6 foot tall, 170-pound guy. It was hard to, equate to the players of today.
If I'm going to say a decade, I want you to say your favorite player from that decade.
Okay,
The 60s,
Lance Allworth.
70s. Who is Lance Allworth? No one's going to know who Lance Allworth is.
Well, arguably one of the greatest receivers ever that played for the Chargers. He had a lot of records that he held for a long, long time in an era when they didn't pass nearly as much. So it's hard to equate people's numbers back then to people of today because first down, he was such a gifted athlete. He could run. They called him Bambi because of his athleticism. He was fast. He could jump like crazy, and he could catch anything within a mile of him. Looked like he was going to catch it. So he was by far my favorite player of the 60s. He retired from professional football in 71, I think, or 72.
Okay, then the 70s.
Well, the 70s, it was hard not to like the Steelers, or the Steelers were obviously the team to beat in those days. They had Terry Bradshaw as the quarterback, Lynn Swann. Lynn Swann was the same as Lance Allworth. Lynn Swann was a beautiful receiver to watch, and just, there were guys along the way like that were lots of fun to watch. And so
Who's
I
your
would say
70s pick? It can't be Lynn Swann.
it can be
Okay, Lynn Swann is the answer.
Lynn Swann.
80s.
Yeah. 80s. You got into some other people, and so late 70s, early 80s. I like watching Earl Campbell run.
Yeah, that's a good pick.
So Earl Campbell was an amazing running back. He was something that he was almost big and strong and fast, and he he could either run over people or run around them, and that we hadn't seen a person like him before because he was big as the lineman but fast as the backs. So he was a lot of fun to watch.
Okay, 90s then.
Well, the next person that I'm not good on the decades, Ty, because I don't remember who.
The next time. I think Campbell came in like 77.
Yeah, the next person the next person that I remember that was another freak because of how good he was Bo Jackson.
Yeah.
Bo Jackson was another person like Campbell. He was big and strong. And then see the change that happened along the way. When I was going to high school, there wasn't even a weight machine at my high school until towards the end. And then when there was a weight machine, it was just one of those little universals, had 10 stations kind of around a thing. So what we had in our upstairs of our house on Rosemary, that's what the high school had.
Yeah.
A machine like that. And so weightlifting, that's why it was push-ups and sit-ups and stuff like that, because there wasn't the drive for diet and exercise wasn't as important as it is these days. So, we had regular sized people. If we had a guy at one point, I think I was the second or third biggest guy on the Cherry Creeks team at 170.
Yeah.
So that's what changed the nature of things. And there are people who became ridiculously strong just because of their devotion to doing, there's a lot of those guys that were poor guys from the South that said they did sit-ups and push-ups so much that they became big and strong and stuff like that. Plus they just started off gifted athletes.
Lyle
So,
Alberto got him some HGH.
yeah, and then when we started with the weightlifting, then it became very popular. And like you said, there's guys that abused it. That I knew some guys who I went to college with that took things that ultimately led to their demise, like Lyle Alzado. And Cullen Bryant was a guy that I played against in high school, and he played professionally, and he was, he wasn't normal because he had just built his body up so strong that he ultimately died early, like in his 40s or something like that. So that was a change that happened, not necessarily a good change. It sort of changed some people and made some people famous who had been not very big and strong. So that was almost a bad side to it, and introduced that.
Who was your favorite teammate you ever had?
Well, we had a running back in high school named Mike Ellis, who was, one of the fastest. He received a full ride to Auburn to play running back at Auburn. So on my senior year, when we were a bad team, when everybody got healthy, because Ellis had been hurt too. So the backfield was Tom Tassone, who played collegiately D1, Mike Ellis, who played D1. I played fullback, and Mike Lee played at the academy for a year. So everybody in the backfield went D1 except me. It was really depressing.
Who was the funniest teammate you had?
Oh, usually it was back in those days. It was the middle linebacker, whoever that was, because what you found for a middle linebacker was the craziest guy that the school had, the biggest, toughest guy, and put him at middle linebacker. And sometimes they weren't the most. They usually weren't on the dean's list. Let's put it that way. So they were crazy and tough, and they were. So we had my junior year was a guy named Steve Swartz, and during the prayer before the game or whatever, you'd say, "Steve, make a noise like a train," and he'd go, "Woo, woo." So while the coaches were trying to,
Right.
have a serious moment, he's playing like he's a train. And then the next year we switched to a guy named Jerry Nix, who was a great guy, but of the same, he went to the Marines, and there was a reason he went to the Marine Corps, because he was that tough. And blood would be flowing down his face, and he'd be laughing and having a great time. And we'd say, "Jerry, you got blood all over you." He goes, "Oh, great." So those guys, the middle linebackers, are usually funny.
And who's your favorite modern day football player? Who makes you want to watch football still, other than me?
Well, so if I can't catch a Volters game, uh, I like the innovation. Patrick Mahomes is obviously a very fun quarterback to watch. This year, Russell Wilson, he just kind of outsmarts the other team. Every time they think he's going to do one thing, he does something else, and so it's fun to watch people. Aaron Rodgers, from the quarterback position, those three guys are sort of my favorites.
Yeah, what about non-quarterbacks?
Uh, you know, the with the advent of so much passing, some of the receivers are remarkable. Larry Fitzgerald is one that's been doing it for a while.
Yeah,
He's one of my favorite guys to watch.
pretty solid. Okay, thanks so much for coming on. You did really
Well,
good. You feel I think you dropped some knowledge bombs on us about some football over the decades.
thanks, Ty.
I think people could have
Well,
learned some stuff, especially
I,
about some eras bygone.
well, I appreciate you having me, and it was delightful to talk about those days and looking back and some of the high points but when I was 12 and had Coach Single has always been very special. You know, if you ever experience a coach like that that's innovative and smart, and these days, you know, Bill Walsh was looked at like that, Andy Reid's kind of like that. He just did things that other people hadn't thought of yet. So the only problem was having that as a 12-year-old and then never having that good of coaching again up through even my college coach.
Yeah,
Was nothing compared to Coach Single. So it was fun that I got to experience a man like that.
I had a sixth grade basketball coach that really, after him, it's all been downhill.
Very funny. All right.
All right, see ya.
Thank you. Bye.